Hello folks, my name is Dave Sommers. I'm a captain of the dive boat Lion's Paw. My wife and I, Ann, have been operating a dive charter business here off and on for many years. Our current boat is the Lion's Paw, and we've been doing that boat for about 10 years. We've dived the wrecks from north off Avon to south off Cape Lookout, and throughout the North Atlantic Basin, and some diving in the Eastern Pacific. So we're both avid divers. I bring this topic to you because it's one of my favorite subjects about Hatteras diving, because ships have had to sail past the Diamond Shoals since the discovery of the area by Europeans. And we're talking back to the 1400s. Many of those ships are still here with us today. Now, the majority of ships that come to grief on the Diamond are from the days of wooden ships and iron men, sailing vessels. Like I said, all the way back to the Spanish terra firma fleets. And there's many reasons for that. The Spanish treasure fleets to the 1900s, shipwrecks occurred. Now, I'd like to stand here and talk to you about all the gold doubloons and reels and pieces of 8 and bars of silver. I actually thought I found a bar of silver one day on the Diamond Shoals, but my luck, it turned out to be lead. So, though I'd like to talk about Spanish doubloons and reels, we're going to talk about something that the average diver can see, take a bite of history, and really enjoy and whatnot, and that is the wrecks from about 1850 to just after the turn of the last century. It's hard to believe we're in the new century, but turn of the last century, and that is the steamers of the Diamond Shoals. It is a time of change in the world of maritime history, as well as here in the U.S. And most of these vessels that we're going to represent that change, and they're powered by the new age, steam, taking away from the sailboat. And we're going to take a look at that. But first, we're going to discuss how these ships actually got here and why they're here. Let's take a look to do that. We take a look at the chart of the North Carolina coastline. Now, North Carolina coastline has 4 separate capes, and each of them has an associated shoal with them. And I'm not even going to talk about the ones north of the Diamond Shoal. There's 2 more there, Wimble and, come on, Mark, what's the next one? Currituck. Anyway, those shoals, each of them has caused grief to mariners over the decades and over the centuries. Each of them has shipwrecks to their credit. Even though down here Frying Pan Shoal from Cape Fear sticks out further into the ocean than the Diamond Shoal stands alone in the number of ships that have come to grief here. There's a reason behind that, and you're going to find out why. Was there any surprise to that one? Let's, up. Nope, wrong way. I'm going to master the technology here. I'm still in the last century. The main reason is all coastal shipping has to round the Diamond Shoal. We stick out further east than any point on the coastline than South Florida. We are closest to that main transport corridor of the Gulf Stream than any other place along the East Coast. This is what was true today, and what this is from marinetraffic.com, a ship density tracking map. You can see my little green antenna there. That's our house up there in Frisco, where the receiving data comes in and goes to the computer worldwide. This is the coastal traffic rounding the Diamond Shoal out here. You can see they get pretty close even today. Back in the early days, they got even closer than that, and there's some reasons behind that. Now, getting close to the shoal is not terribly a problem for today's powerful vessels. You got 1,000-foot freighters out there that make 25 knots. They have powerful, reliable power engines. They have navigation that puts them within 10 feet of where they're at. That did not exist for the mariners during the time frame we're going to be talking about. The other thing is the Gulf Stream runs near here. They're trailing the Gulf Stream up here to give them a push when they're going north and to stay in deep water when they're heading south. That Gulf Stream, at its worst, can run up to 6 knots. Now, our average is about a knot to maybe 2.5, unless, of course, you want to dive a wreck up on the Diamond Shoals, then it's always 4. But early steamers did not have the advantage of powerful engines. At the most, they averaged 6 to 8, maybe the fast ones were 10 knots. But when you're going against a heavy Gulf Stream current, that's not quite a lot of power. This shoal has been known to mariners since the time of exploration, since the time those early European mariners came over here. Because the first ones that ran across it said, we better put this down on the map. So it's on every chart that we find. This is a chart that was published in 1918. We just heard about World War I. This was a 1918 World War I chart. The Diamond Shoal, here we have our inlets. There's Ocracoke, there's Hatteras, there's the point, and here's the Diamond Shoal stretching out to sea. Most of the data on this chart was from the 1850s. So when they published it, it's already a lifetime old. There was not a lot of energy, money, and time spent in doing rehydrographic surveys. In fact, the first time they tried to come down here and put a lighthouse out on the Diamond Shoal, the whole thing failed because the chart they were using was using this 1850s data. They got there and the hydrography was wrong, and that effort failed. So the charts they were using were not necessarily accurate. Also, you had to really be careful as a mariner because you pulled out a British chart. It used different soundings. It used different data. It used an American chart. It did different. And sometimes they even blended the two. Your chart might have fathoms on it. It might have feet on it. It might even have leagues on it. So you had to be very careful as a mariner as to what you were using, how it translated, and how accurate it was. So that was one of the problems. The changeable nature of the shoals made it a best guess for most mariners if they did not have local knowledge as to where they could cut the shoal, whether they go inside of this particular area or had to go out around side. Taking a look at the close-up of the shoal. The cartography is from a slightly later chart, but you notice that it shows depths out here in, is that feet or fathoms? No. Outside of this dotted line, it's fathoms. Inside, it's feet. And here we got very few feet, and they're showing shoals of rock up there. The other thing I would like to bring your attention to is on this chart, there's 9 charted shipwrecks scattered around the shoal. 9 of them in this version of the chart. So wouldn't any competent mariner stay the hell away from this dangerous shoal? And the answer is absolutely they would. They did so at all costs, but there were also costs for many vessels of trying to go around the shoal. They had to wait for weather, they had to wait for conditions, they had to have the power to do it. They stayed away from the shoal at all costs, but there were many factors working against these mariners during the time. Wrong way, guys. I'll get the buttons right here. Number one of them is, as I just briefly talked about, is this shoal is the confluence of 2, actually 3 currents, as Mark reminds me all the time when I say this. The first is the Gulf Stream and most powerful. Gulf Stream coming up from the south. Here's our satellite shot in our modern times. I can look at this and say whether we're going to be in warm water, cool water, or mixed before I leave the dock, and it's typically pretty accurate. So the axis of the Gulf Stream out here, very hot water. You can see that it kind of meanders back and forth, but it chugs right up there and crosses right there near Cape Hatteras. From the north, we have the primary Labrador current, cooler, greener water, and the close to shore current is called what, Mark?
South Atlantic Bight.
The South Atlantic Bight current. So the South Atlantic Bight current is actually kind of joins with the Labrador. Coming down from the north, you can have a heck of a current, and it's awfully squirrely as you get in near the shore, and it can set you off course just as much as that raging Gulf Stream current coming from the south. So 2 major currents meeting here at this shoal can create havoc for the ship because it drifts your vessel, and it causes some primary reasons. The other thing, I did it again. The other thing, major weather. Everybody knows what do you see when you're on the Weather Channel and they talk about hurricanes? This hurricane is 150 miles south-southwest of Cape Hatteras. Why do they always have to use Cape Hatteras on major hurricanes? It means it's coming right here, and it just makes me nervous. But major storms, we all remember in our lifetimes Superstorm Sandy. It came right off the coast here, really rearranged some of our shipwrecks, created havoc. And everybody here that has a connection to Hatteras remembers Hurricane Isabel, 2003. Cut through the island just north of the village, caused terrible destruction, but it also uncovered a lot of shipwrecks. But over the centuries, hurricanes, big nor'easters, storms in the winter months, And before we started naming hurricanes, these storms took a lot of vessels here, shoved them up on the shoal, or sunk them near the shoal because of the shoaling effect creates monstrous waves. That includes the Spanish fleet from 1750. When they were coming up the coast here, they lost 4 of their vessels along North Carolina coast. I need to find one of those, just one, that's all I need. So anyway, a lot of ships have followed suit. Not just major storms. Localized weather phenomena are a critical factor in how many of these steamers ended up on the shoal or on the beach. What happens here is because that Gulf Stream is warm even in the wintertime, so it gets warm, humid air, the wind shifts the right direction, blows it over that Labrador current, cold surface, and what do we get? Very thick advection fog, very thick fog. That creates difficulty for a lot of reasons. Number one reason, if you can't see where you're at, don't know where you're at, and you can't see where you're going. If you don't know where you're going and don't know where you're at, and you're near the Diamond Shoals, that's going to be a problem. And that's the number one thing. This winter, we had a very good example of that. How many people living local here remember some of this winter had some very thick fogs, at least 3, 4 days in a row where you couldn't see a quarter mile. That happens regularly offshore. We don't see it as much inshore. And it has from this local effect here. There we go. The last issue for the ancient mariner, geez, it was only 100 years ago. Their cartography. It was simple. It was direct. Here's a shot of the Cape Hatteras here all the way up to the Chesapeake Bay entrance. Large scale WAC chart, a wide area chart. They would look at this chart and they'd say, where are we? That's the number one question. Well, today, what do we do in our car? Where am I? Boop, 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 boop. You push your buttons and the GPS says, hey, dude, you're here, turn right. They don't have that. They utilized the sextant. The sextant was the primary tool of navigation, that and some other azimuthing devices they had, but the sextant. They used the sextant for shots of the sun, the moon, and the primary stars to navigate, and that way they determined where they're at. When you're using a sextant, you have these 2 guys here. You see the one guy here on the right is going, my angle is what? You know, your declination, use the sextant by shooting the object, bringing it down to the horizon, the difference in that, the direction of it, and then you gotta map all that out. You do a bunch of arithmetic, you look at your table of declinations, and then you come up with a figure, and you plot it on the chart. You plot it, you try to take at least 3 sightings. That's the rule. Get at least 3 sightings. Now, if the clouds are obscuring your view, you may only get 1. But with 3 sightings, you plot them on the chart, and what do? You hook them together, and you get what we call in navigation, sextant navigation, what do we call it? Hal's sitting here nodding, is the cocked hat, because it resembles the old cocked hat that the British guys used to wear. So you get the cocked hat, and your position is somewhere within the cocked hat, if you did your math right. If you didn't do your math right, you may be 100 miles off. So that was your best guess of your position. So you plotted your position, and that was the last known place you were at, and you said, by Gumby, I know where I'm at. Set this course, helmsman, we're good to go, we're clear of the Diamond Shoal. Maybe not. The other method they used was lead line. Now, what's this guy doing in here? You don't just lower it over the side slowly till it counts the bottom and you say, oh, okay, because your vessel is moving through the ocean. So this guy has to get in the forward part of the vessel, gets that thing going, he chucks that lead as far forward as he can get it, lets it hit the bottom, straightens it up as he comes by it, and says, okay, 75, and he pulls it on up, and then he looks at the bottom of it. Because you put a little tallow, some wax in the bottom of it, because you want to bring up a little bit of that sample from the bottom. And why is that? The coastal charts are of that day. They're not so much anymore. We don't get as many. But the older coastal charts were littered with spot soundings near areas of shoaling water. Just littered with, here it's 80, here it's 75, here it's... And that allowed them to keep an idea of where they were at, all right, coming up on the shoal. They were sampling the bottom because the little notations on the chart mean different things. And so here within the area of the shoal, if you're up in that area, you might see coarse sand and gray shells. But down over in this area, you bring up coarse sand with some black specks in it. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe 15 feet away from those black specks, those other coarse gray shells. So it's a best guess at best. And the other thing is, you're in pretty deep water down here. You get a whole bottle of water, but it's not that far. This is less than a mile, or about 2 miles, to 14 foot of water. So very critical. Relying strictly upon the sounding, or running the lead as they called it, was not necessarily the best choice for navigating in the dark or when you're lost. Okay? The other thing, boy, I love looking at these old charts. I have a real affinity to them, and I buy them when I can find them. They all have these sailing directions in the marginella. And the sailing directions for the Cape Hatteras area are quite complex. I'm not going to go through this, but this is if you come to the shoal from this heading and you see the lighthouse, go here, then turn this way, then turn that way. You go down here. It's just incredibly complex, and I'm glad I'm not navigating in that manner because I would probably be hard aground very quickly. I have trouble with following the magenta line on the GPS some days. The most critical thing on this is, in approaching the shoals at night or in bad weather, if the lighthouse has not been seen before night, it will not be prudent to run for it. And that one sentence says everything to the mariner that needs to know. If you don't know where you're at and you cannot obviously see it, you better stay away. Well, sometimes when you're in the ocean, you can't stay away. I know I was going to talk about steamers of the Diamond Shoals, but our first ship we're going to talk about in a little bit of detail is not a steamer, but it's from our era. And it's a typical sailing schooner, the Catherine M. Monohan. It was built in 1904, really late in the age of sail vessels. There was steamers being built from the from the Civil War time, 1850s till now, but they chose to build this as strictly a schooner. She sunk out here in 1910, crossing the shoal 1910. But I bring it in Monohan because it came over the shoal, and it represents the fate of 56 similar vessels by my count in the loss records during this time frame. Because they didn't just you don't throw away your old car just because the new model comes out, right? You keep working that ship till it's no longer of use, and that's what they were doing. But her demise is typical of 56 of these similar sailing vessels. She was on a voyage from New York City down to Knights Key in Florida in 1910. She was doing that for the Overseas Railway down there, taking supplies down to the Overseas Railway being built down to Key West. She came over the shoal in darkness at night, August 23rd, 1910. The weather was very fair. The seas were relatively calm, but obviously they didn't see the lighthouse because she struck the bottom. Bam, bam, bam. Hit the bottom a few times, opened up the wood seam, started her leak. She came across the shoal and bounced over a few spots, and the crew and the captain said, "Hey, we're doing okay. We're not sunk yet." We got off the shoal. They headed south. The Monohan is sunk straight off the beach here, about 12 miles, just due south of where we're at. 100 foot of water. So she went down because they did do some damage as she bounced over that shoal. You hit that sandbar, you think you're good, but on a wooden ship, it opens the seams up and you take water. So she sunk out there, and the crew, as they were going down, they launched their crew boats, they rowed themselves to shore, and were met by the coastal lifesavers on the beach down here at Ocracoke. Nobody died. Very, very unusual in that factor. How do I know about all this? Most of these vessels that came afoul here during this time frame have a very detailed and accurate, pretty accurate I've found, U.S. Life Saving Service report. The keeper of the station would write this report out. It included where they're at, where they're going, who the crew was, a description of what was going on, vessel, value of cargo, where they were headed, how many people were saved, how many people drowned, that type of thing. They're kept up in Manio, the Outer Banks History Center. You can actually look, well, I've not pawed through many of them lately, but years ago you could look through them. The detail on these things is amazing, And the important thing for us often as divers is, hey, what was this thing carrying? Is it cool stuff? Is it valuable? The main thing here was cement. I know some divers here are laughing because they know what's coming. And, well, we know it's the wreck of the MONOHAN we're diving because here's the cement. The MONOHAN cement was carried in bags, and mysteriously there's a lot of barrels there. But my theory is when the bags broke open, the mariners just dumped it into a barrel and said, oh, I'm going to put this in the barrel because this bag of cement's getting everywhere, and they're there too. So the whole entire wreck of the MONOHAN, she's a wooden vessel, and wood vessels just get eaten up by the worms in the sea. Pieces break off and float away. What maintains of the MONOHAN is the cement bag reef, the giant reef of cement bags with some artifacts of the shipwreck around, and it's well defined. If you look at it in the clear visibility and you say, oh, there's the outline of the ship, giant holds of cement bags. Really, it's a pretty cool dive. She also qualifies as a steamer in a small way because it in fact has a steam engine and a boiler on board. At the bow end of the wreck, wrong end for propulsion, but the bow end of the wreck, there's a small boiler and there's this steam winch. And the steam winch allowed them to haul up and down this big old massive pile of anchor chain and this big old Navy fluke anchor that's laying out in the sand. That way, with a steam power winch and windlass, they could run with a smaller crew. Because they didn't have to have 25 guys running around that capstan hanging that thing up by hand. So they had a steam power on this late version of a shipwreck. And so the MONOHAN's a really neat little dive to do, 100 foot deep, has a lot of sea life on it. We enjoy going there often. We're going to move on to transitional steamers. Early steamers, and Mark touched on this earlier today, the early steamers had sort of the design of a sailboat. Their hulls look a little like sailboats. They even carried sailing rigs on it. This one here is similar to the next shipwreck we're going to talk about, the SS Nevada. I have not yet found a drawing or a photograph of the Nevada. The Nevada was built up in, there goes my brain cells. Doesn't matter. Built up in New England, built by this same yard that built this one. This one was built in 1863. The Nevada was built in 1864. Same yard, same kind of time frame, same general design characteristics. This is going to be similar to our shipwreck, the SS Nevada. Sunken and destroyed on the shoals were 14 vessels during this time frame that were constructed of wood and iron, or just wood. And it's representative of the Nevada represents these because it's an early sailing or early steamer with a simple steam engine, sail plan. The ship was made of wood. These came in two varieties: paddle wheelers, side paddle wheelers. Typically were used inland on bays and rivers, but they also made the ocean. They made a lot of blockade runners with paddle wheels, and then they made screw steamers. This is a screw steamer, as is the Nevada. Sails, kind of think of them as the backup engine because steam engines were still in their infancy in a way. Now, we know a lot about the Nevada, not just from the shipwreck life-saving thing, but also you look through all kinds of information that you can, and the New York Times. The New York Times article of it, because they used to report on shipping a great deal, says that near midnight, sailing along in a thick fog, she stranded on the Diamond Shoals June the 4th of 1868. She sunk 2 days later because they were up on the shoals, they came on the shoals, they grounded on the shoals, there was a good swell running, and the good swell picks your boat up and keeps slamming it back down on that sandbar. And every time that boat comes down on that sandbar, it's like driving a nail with your hammer. It keeps working the boat, and working a wooden boat, you're going to work those seams open and the water's going to come in. So the people on the Nevada thought they could save it. They ran the anchors out to try to kedge the boat off. That's what I did when I ran aground last. I ran the anchors out on a life jacket, put them out in deep water, and I ended up working my boat off, pulled myself off the sandbar. They were doing the same thing on a larger scale. That didn't work. She was stuck fast, and the waves were picking up and pounding the boat. So then they said, we got to get rid of some of this weight. So they started chucking all the general merchandise they were carrying, all the boxes and crates that they could physically move, they threw them overboard as well. Tried to light her to ship, get her light, get her off the shoal. That didn't work either. Water kept rising in her, and they said, well, if we can't get off the shoal, we're getting off this ship. So they launched their lifeboats, their ship's boats, and they took to shore. They rowed into shore, and there was no loss of life. So what happened in the Nevada? She freed herself the next day. The wind shifted, tide came up off the shoal she went. She drifted about 7 or 8 miles south of the shoal, and she sunk in about 90 feet of water, 80 to 90 feet. This is the steam engine from the Nevada. It's a very simple, single-cylinder, inverted steam engine. Inverted meaning the piston drives down. Sounds backwards, but that's what it is. And she's big, huge, cast iron monolith. Rises, what do you think, about 20 feet, 25, 30 feet from the bottom? Big, single-cylinder engine. It was an early steam engine, and it has early designed boilers with it that are sitting right in front of it. Most boilers on the ships we dive are round. We call them Scotch boilers. They get bolts through them, the ends are on, they're made of thick metal. That way they can have high pressure steam and not explode. These guys were square, kind of like riveted together, a low pressure engine. So 2 square stack low pressure boilers right and forward of the engines, and they produce the steam to drive the engine that you saw there before. And the engine drove a single large iron propeller. It seems to be iron to me. What do you think? Steve, you know. Iron? Bronze? Iron. So an iron propeller, kind of an orally designed iron 4-bladed wheel, big old fat shaft, and a view of it from the other side. You can see the size of it compared to the diver. The blades are pretty big. Slow turning propeller, because that engine only can go so fast being a single cylinder engine. Forward of that boiler, you can see the boiler here on the lower left, and the diver's kind of over top the boiler. Forward of that is where the cargo holds were, and you can see various cargo and whatnot. Early in the day, divers' day, there were urns. They called it the urn wreck a long time ago because they found these earthenware urns that kind of fit inside a 5-gallon bucket carrying food goods or whatever. There were gun parts, it looked like sewing machine pieces to me, gas lantern parts, a variety of stuff. I've seen broken shards of earthenware, dishes, and things of that nature over the years. Put this together, wrong way, and the shipwreck looks a little like this. You got the main cylinder, you got the engines, and we're going to the right here, that's the stern piece toward the right, and the boilers sit right over here. It's in an area, it's only about 7 miles off the beach, and the fishing guys call it the bad bottom. It get a little muddy, but it also can have 150-foot viz, depends upon the vagrancies of that Gulf Stream. So you put it all together, that's what the layout looks like. Now the Nevada had an insured value in 1868 of over $200,000. An enormous amount of money for the time, leading people who do research on ships to think this has got to have some good stuff on it. So we've had dive boats over the years come down here and work it, and even one of them years ago sat on it and dredged and dredged and dredged. They found gun parts, brass lantern parts, things like that. They found no gold treasure. The treasure on the Nevada was in its cargo. And this is the remnants of the cargo here. Forward there, you'll find an area where there's a whole lot of railroad track. Whole lot of railroad track. And what these items are right here, take a look at them. Think of the old steam engines you see in Westerns. That's the side pistons from a locomotive. In 1868, the locomotive was space shuttle technology, if you will. Very expensive piece of equipment. So that's what was on the Nevada. And that's where the value lay. It was actually headed down to Brazil, I believe. Doesn't matter. The Nevada, next slide here. So there we go on that. The Nevada captain, they took his license for lack of due precaution because he steamed in the fog, he failed to take soundings, and he ran his boat aground across the shoal and lost it. And the insurance company was quite upset. So he lost his captain's license for a while. I don't know his history beyond that. Our next vessel, an interesting one. This is a British boat, the WETHERBY. She was built in 1883 in West Hartlepool, England. This is a painting of that steamer. Now, this is sort of a transitional boat. Now, in 1883, the Nevada had been on the bottom for 15 years already. So this is a little newer, a little vessel. The vessel looks different, looks a little more like a steamship. You know, it's got that 3-stack design, little bow bulwarks, a center castle, stern castle, but it also still carrying masts. It's still carrying sail propulsion just in case. She's 285 foot long, a bit bigger than the Nevada, which is about 160. And she is made of iron and not wood. There's a couple reasons for this, because of the progression of the ability to make the big things out of iron. But also in England, by this time, iron is cheaper than importing timber from the US and Canada to build ships in England, because they don't have any more British oak. It was very thin. So they were making iron because they got it out of Scotland and all those mines and whatnot there. So the design of the steamer is evolving, more modern look. It's getting a little better, a little stronger. But that still didn't prevent it from being stranded on the shoal December 2nd of 1893. Now, she was bound from Florida, heading up to Rotterdam over in Europe. But you say, that seems kind of strange to come by Hatteras to go to Europe from Florida. It is and it isn't. The Gulf Stream gives you that push up. Even in the Spanish fleet days, they'd come up the Gulf Stream and then hook a right and go to England or go to Europe. But she was stopping in Newport News to coal up because she had to get the gas stop before she made the jump across the Atlantic. So she was really going to Newport News to coal up, do a little transfer, and then go across to Europe. So she's stranded on a shoal December the 2nd. She was only 10 years old at the time, so a fairly new vessel. Now, the British Admiralty Court held this master. His name was John Thomas Wilson, very British name. They held him negligent by the want of due care. Specifically, they faulted him because in his navigation, he failed to take into account the push of the Gulf Stream, because he'd had some sightings that he crossed as he passed Cape Lookout, and he knew how fast he was going, and he was going much faster than his vessel could make under steam alone. Yet he didn't take that into account for the next leg of the journey up here to the Diamond Shoal. And when he got up here to the Diamond Shoal, he saw the lighthouse. So he thought he knew where he was at. But he did the old mariner's thumbnail. Oh, we're 12 miles off. We're plenty good. Well, they weren't 12 miles off. They were only about 6. So the mariner's eyeball failed to be adjusted, and they zinged him for not casting the lead. And that's what they said. You failed to cast the lead properly, and that's part of why you came aground. So he got in there, and he actually did realize he was in trouble. When he saw the lighthouse, made his first judgment call, and then he realized the water was shoaling badly, he tried to make course adjustments. He made 3 radical course adjustments to get his vessel out of there. But the current swept him up onto the shoal, just as it will do us today, and he ended up inside the Diamond Shoal in the shallows there, ran aground, and that was the end of the Weatherby. Not really, because the Weatherby is here with us today. Part of identifying the Weatherby is the engine type. Engines come in different varieties, that was discussed earlier, and this vessel, made of iron, was driven by a 220 horsepower, 2-cylinder compound steam engine. And you can see that right here. You got a compound steam engine sitting on her here in the sand. And when you look at the top, you can see those 2 cylinders, the compound ones. The first cylinder is always the smallest one, because the steam pressure is at its greatest coming out of the boilers there. It drives down. They balance the strength of the engine by cylinder size, because they can do the math. I can't. Engineers can. They do the math. This first cylinder uses it. By the time it ejects the steam and goes into the second cylinder, the pressure has reduced, therefore the amount of push. So they compensate that by making the piston much bigger, so that the pistons are balanced, so that it runs smoothly. That's what this is. This is a compound 2-cylinder steam engine. It's an interesting engine because it has all kinds of levers and gears and whiz-bangs sitting out the side of it. And you can sit there on the bottom if the current is not ripping along at +2 knots and look at how this drivetrain works. That is, if you can see the entire engine like you can on this day here. Much of the time, what we see is right about where that diver's at. Just the top of that engine sticking out, because these are like sugary smooth, sugar white sands at the Diamond Shoals. The storms move the sand over the wreck, the storms move the sand away. Also the current. On a currenty day, you can see that scour blowing away. So what's exposed there? The engine, the boilers, various bits and pieces, the stern sometimes, sometimes not on this day. This is a section of the bow piece laying on our side. That comes and goes as well. I have seen rows of the side of the ship, seen the stern castle, seen the bow. Then again, the next time you go there, you see nothing. Nothing at all. But that's the nature of the shoals. I call it shipwreck preservation. The next ship we're going to look at is one of my favorites up there. And I think anybody that dives any of the steamers at the Diamond Shoals will agree that the Hesperides wreck is kind of cool. It's unique in a wide variety, for a variety of reasons. She is a British vessel again. Remember, the Brits were dominant in worldwide maritime transport during this time frame. If there was a ship on the ocean, you had a 7 out of 10 chance it was British. So they moved a great deal of the world's supply that gave rise to the strength of the British Empire. Anyway, this one was home ported in Liverpool, England. Pretty standard ship for the time. She's 286 foot in length, pretty good vessel. British engine as well. There again, another two-cylinder steam engine. This one had about 182 horsepower, but the horsepower doesn't move your boat, torque does. And that's where these things, she moved along about 11 knots full steam. So her average cruising speed would be 8 to 10. So 11 knots flank. This vessel was owned by the Houston Lines. They had a fleet of vessels. They served primarily the American trade and the South American trade. They were part of what they called the Plata trade. And they would go down to South America, ports of the River Plata and whatnot. That's primarily what the Hesperides originally did. She was on this vessel. On this voyage, she'd left Santiago de Cuba, and they called it, modern name is Daiquiri, Cuba, and she was bound for Baltimore, Maryland. She had about 1,400 net tons of pig iron, just iron ore, pig iron, on board. She carried things all the way from frozen beef from Brazil to pig iron. So they kind of converted her to pig iron. She was moving along, and this was October the 4th, and she left Cuba October the 4th. She ran aground on the Diamond Shoals October the 9th, 1897, and that's where they found her stranded. She was chugging along up the beach, according to the ship's log, which was available. At noon on October the 8th, the Hesperides should have been 202 miles from the Diamond Shoals. That's what they thought. Well, 12 hours later, they found out they were wrong. They were a lot closer than that. So based on this belief, the master of the vessel, a guy named Captain Owen Williams, he set his course to pass 20 miles to the east of the Diamond Shoals because he knew, because he plotted this course before and he didn't want anything to do with the Diamond Shoals. So in thinking where he was, he set his course so he would pass 20 miles to the east. Didn't happen that way. He did not expect to be at the latitude of the shoals until 1 p.m. on the 9th, but long about midnight, I believe it was. I'm getting my ships confused here. Anyway, oh, I see how to do this. Got to run my notes down. Yeah. So, he's chugging along. He thinks he's out in deep water. He's not casting the lead, which might have showed him differently. And he was in, guess what? A thick fog. So he's running into thick fog, thinking he's a long ways from the Diamond Shoals. And he found out, the first time he found out he was aground was when he ran aground. Because of the weather conditions, because of that, he did not notice that he was crossing out of the Gulf Stream into shallow water, and he ran aground on the shoal. They were not in any immediate danger. The sea was not that big, and they were not pounding, they were not coming apart, but they were taking water. And the crewmen, the life-saving crew at the shore, saw the ship aground, and they ended up having to row out there that when the morning came. They rowed out there, And they arrived, they had to convince the captain to abandon the ship, saying, "Sir, you're not getting your ship off of here. You've got 6 feet of water in the engine room and rising, and you're not going anywhere." So after a lot of discussion, he loaded the entire crew of 24 people. They got into the surf boat, they rowed them back to shore, and that was the end of the Hesperides. They went out there to take a look at it later to see if it could be salvaged. No such luck. She was mired into the sands of the shoal and already starting to come apart in places. And the Hesperides today is quite a spectacular wreck to dive. It's a maximum of about 45 feet deep. Here's our picture of the bow, kind of looking down at the port side of the bow. You can see that anchor chain running off into the sand for that starboard anchor. And we have our port side anchor sitting up here. And that's what she looks like. You want to get that tattooed on your arm, then you're a real sailor. That is the Hesperides bow, port side anchor on the deck, and it is still standing up proud. An iron vessel on the Diamond Shoals through countless hurricanes and storms, still relatively intact. Pretty marvelous construction. The engine here, you'll see that engine. It stands proud on its base. The top of the engine, you can see the top of the water here. The top of that engine is at about 10 to 12 foot of water, is below 10 to 12 feet of water. So you don't want to go over it in a deep draft vessel. There again, we said it was a 2-cylinder compound engine. There again, you see the smaller in the back, larger in the front. The little sting on the top is where the piston rod goes up in to guide the piston. You don't think, it's not like a giant piston in a car, but a big disc, so it runs up and down on a guide pin. There again is a British engine. She moved along at about 11 knots, and that engine turned this big old screw, and I've seen the sand covering the tips of the propeller. I've seen all 4 blades of the propeller exposed. It's a very changeable nature of the Diamond Shoals. And here we have the rudder, which you're looking at right there, and that's what the rudder is attached to up there on the stern castle, and that is the steering quadrant. The steering cables and chains would have gone around that quadrant, and when you turned that big old wheel, you wound that and you moved that rudder left to right. Very robust piece of equipment, and typically on these shipwrecks, that'll stand erect and proud a long time until it falls over in the sand. This one's got a long ways to go. Big bronze piece of equipment. That is only about 6 to 8 feet under the surface. So on a relatively swelly day, I watch where I'm going when I'm maneuvering around on the Hesperides. Therefore, I do not wish to join the Hesperides. Tremendous wreck to dive. Bottom time is only restricted by how much you drank before you started your dive, because I won't do that. Next shipwreck. Very, very interesting shipwreck here, the Northeastern. She came ashore there on December 27, 1904. This is an early oil tanker. Didn't carry the oil in tanks, though. When we talk about a barrel of oil, this ship carried barrels of oil. So it goes back in history here. You get your research where you can. And this is a kind of an interesting little article we're going to go through. Special to the New York Times, Norfolk, Virginia, December 28th. A wreck off Hatteras. Liner pounding on Diamond Shoals and lifesavers helpless. That's the headline for this New York Times article. There is tonight pounding on the inner Diamond Shoals off Cape Hatteras, a 3-masted, 1-funnel steamer whose name it is impossible to learn. 2 life-saving crews stand powerless on the beach as it means certain death to launch a boat in heavy seas. The wind is blowing a gale and waves are running in marine parlance mountain high. Out of the inky darkness, over the water tonight, could be seen torches flashing, mute appeals for the help that cannot be sent. If the ship is a staunch one, she can live until morning, but the chances are against this ill-fated craft. Few vessels, once grounded there, have escaped from the notorious Diamond Shoals, the graveyard of shipping. The vessel, which carries probably a crew of 25 men, struck 8 miles out late Tuesday night when the gale was sweeping up the coast and carrying everything before it. Early this morning, signals of distress were seen from the steamer by the Coast Patrol from Hatteras Station. He answered, and the surfmen from 2 stations were soon on the scene. The wind was 50 miles an hour, and great combers were breaking on the beach, pounding with the roar of artillery. The lifesavers saw it was futile to launch a boat, which would have been smashed like an eggshell, and the imperiled vessel was too far to be reached with the lifeline. At sunset, the vessel appeared to be pounding heavily, and at one time was seen to roll over on her beam ends. Then quickly the ill-fated craft rallied and righted herself. With the aid of the glass, the lifesavers saw that the vessel was waterlogged, which would mean or seem to indicate that she had lumber in her. From all appearances, the stranded ship is a passenger or a fruit liner. At 8 o'clock tonight, the wind had veered to the north, and the sea was apparently going down. From Hatteras, a message was received that the life crews would launch their boats as soon as it was consistent with their safety. The lifesavers are of the opinion that the ship may just survive the night, and they think they will be able to rescue those aboard probably late tonight or tomorrow morning. Well, you know, that's a pretty, usually the press is accused of being exploding a situation, making a mountain out of a molehill. That's pretty close to the reality of what occurred, except for the fact that the life-saving, except for these life-saving guys actually did try to launch their boats. They'd ventured out twice before they were thrown back on the beach. And these guys did it in a boat that they rowed. These open surf boats, they actually rowed out to the Northeastern once they were able to launch, which was probably a dot on the horizon, and the seas were much bigger than this. But they rowed on out here to the vessel, and a little better shot of the Northeastern, and they effected the rescue of the crew. Now, this was correct. The gale was blowing really, really strongly, just short of hurricane. They were shoved up on the shoals, and they didn't even know they were getting there because not only did they have gale seas and big waves, they had coastal fog. So they were chugging along, doing the best they could, hanging on, keeping this vessel going until it didn't go anymore. They drove up on the shoal, and immediately the Northeastern was being beaten apart. She took on water right away, and the crew ended up running from the bow to the very stern of the vessel, because that was the only piece of this vessel that wasn't awash and having waves break over it. So they all gathered on the stern there, doing their Hail Marys or whatever they chose to, and they were firing signal flares off most of the night. The signal flares were responded to, but there again, the rescuers could not come until the next day. When they did get out there, they were able to effect the rescue. The life-saving crew was headed by Patrick Etheridge. They'd already attempted to launch their boats. They were tossed back. Hours of trying. The wind did slack and veered to the north and came off out of the north. That means the waves are going to be knocked down a little bit. They were able to jump on they get off out of the breakers and row the 9 miles in super rough seas and near gale winds to the Northeastern. Not just one boat, but two. The Durant Station, the Creed's Hill Durant, and the Hatteras boat went out there. This shipwreck is said to be by the Coast Guard the origin of the motto that they used: you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. Patrick Etheridge reportedly told his crew that when they were kind of hesitating getting in that boat after they'd been pushed back several times. They got in the boat, they made the row out there, they rescued the people on the Northeastern, they brought them ashore all alive, except for, I believe, one, but we'll skip that because I'm getting my thing. Now, interesting about the Northeastern, it was one of 4 sister ships, Northman, Northtown, and this one here is actually the Northwestern. Best picture of the group of all 4. All 4 of these vessels were eventually owned at one time by the Texaco Oil Company, Texas Oil. The Northeastern was the first one that they owned. And after its demise on the Diamond Shoal, they bought the other 3. They were built up in the Great Lakes by Great Lakes Shipbuilding, all to the same plan, all within the same year. The shipwreck out here on the shoals is definitely the Northeastern. A diver we all know recovered all of the lettering off the back, says Northeastern. That kind of makes it hard to ignore. There's been other artifacts recovered off of capstan, and the portholes that came off of it, the battle covers were iron. They said Great Lakes Shipbuilding on them, embossed in them. So she's definitely the Northeastern. She's in the right spot, the right engine design, the right ship. What does she look like today? Northeastern ships, of these Texaco ships, something of interest. I'll talk a little faster. I didn't put my clock up. But two of them survived to the 1950s. 1950s. And they went to the scrapyard. This one here, the Northwestern, was serving in World War II and was shelled and sunk by the U-507 north of Cuba in 1942. She had been bought by someone else and called the Federal by the time she was shelled and sunk to the bottom. So two of the four sister ships are still on the bottom of the ocean, and the Northeastern is a dive site today here on the Diamond Shoal. And what does she look like? Are we going to work? We're not going to work. She has terrible dark visibility. And we're going to skip the video because it's not going to run. We're going to go straight to the slides. And there she is right there. And here's her compound steam engine. Ahead of it, those round Scotch-style boilers, a little higher pressure, a little more push. This is the actual stern area of the engine area. Very intact. Used to be much more intact when we first started diving her. The sidewalls came up where these ribs on the right go. There was a companionway you swam through. It was really quite spectacular. It's still spectacular, just a little different. Now moving forward on the shipwreck, this is from the starboard side looking forward across. You can see there's a crack across the hull here, and she runs across the entire ship, and the bow and the stern are now kind of sinking down because they're the heavy parts. She used to be kind of more contiguous, but she's still together. Moving over here on the port side a little further forward, all kinds of debris to look at. You can see in the foreground there, or in the background there, that's the actual bow section. The video is actually diving down to the bow section and going inside. It's encrusted with hard and soft corals. It's quite a spectacular thing. You can go inside of it and look down several levels. Lots of cool sea life in there. And here on the very bow, one of the spare anchors laying up there, and it's a really nice dive to do. Often plagued by high current. The current where these Hesperides and Northeastern is can run, average is about 1/4 to 1/2. That's a great day. A bad day is 2.5 to 3 knots, where the current is coming off the shipwreck and it's forming whirlpools in the sea that go down. The first thing you see down current of it is whirlpools. You say, oh, we're not diving here today. And that's quite an interesting thing to see. And last vessel we're going to look at is the SS VETURIA, another British steamer from the era. This British steamer stranded on the Diamond Shoals morning of February 28, 1918, due to a thick fog. A thick fog in the 1900s is a scuba diver best friend. So here we are. She was built in Glasgow, Scotland, and was a pretty new ship when she crashed here, because she built in 1912. So pretty fresh ship. She was coming from Cologne, Panama, with a shipment of nitrites going up here to Hampton Roads. She immediately, when she came ashore here, she ran aground and immediately started pounding, and the stuck ship was coming to pieces. I mean, the crew knew right away they were in deep trouble. So they put out a radio SOS call, because in this time, 1912, wirelesses were now commonly fitted on vessels. And they were starting to use radio navigation aids. They were starting to do DFing of radio stations. But that didn't help her. She ended up on the Diamond Shoal, the outer Diamond Shoal, where the Hesperides and the Northeastern are on the inner Diamond Shoal, about 1/4 mile apart. The VETURIA is on the outer edge of the Diamond Shoals, more exposed to the ocean. Anyway, she started really coming to pieces. The crew sent out this radio SOS, and it was answered by a Coast Guard cutter. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter ONODAGA rescued the crew of the VETURIA, but they had to wait because the ONODAGA could not find them because of the thick fog and the danger of the Diamond Shoal. They knew where they were at from themselves, because they were saying, we're on the Diamond Shoal, beep, 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 come get us. And the ONODAGA came, was searching and searching and searching, and they could not find them until 10 p.m. that night in the darkness. And the closest they could get to them was about 200 yards, because the commander of the ONODAGA says, I'm not going where that ship's at. I'm staying out here where I know I got some water, headed into the current, and just stood right there. They launched a boat at night with building seas, breaking waves around the victim of the VETURIA, and they rowed into the VETURIA 7 trips. They made 7 trips, this crew boat, the boat crew did from the ONODAGA. 7 round trips. They went in there 7 times, rescued these people. They rescued 47 crewmen and passengers off the VETURIA. And most importantly, they got the 3 ship's cats. So they came back and then they took them down and they landed them down in Morehead City. What the shore-based lifesavers did not know the next morning when they did their patrol and looked out there with their glass and they saw the VETURIA on the outer Diamond Shoals getting beat to pieces, they had no idea that the ONODAGA had already done the rescue. What did they do? They launched those surf boats, they rowed all the way out there and found that vessel abandoned. All the way out there. And that's what they did. Those guys, incredible story of the lifesavers here on the Outer Banks. What's left of the VETURIA? It depends upon how much sand is there. Being out on the outer Diamond Shoals, she's been beaten down pretty good. What remains, 3 boilers, 2 of them laying in the boiler position. They kind of rolled over because you can see the fire where they stoked them is kind of rolled off. They should be laying down. Another boiler standing up on end. There again, big hurricane waves can do that. Machinery mounts, maybe a dynamo, condensers, things of that nature, generator, big engine mounts. The engine mount is there and the engine is actually lying over on its side. And I don't have a real good picture of the engine because it's covered with sand during these dives. From the engine area leads the prop shaft. You follow the prop shaft out and sometimes it's exposed all the way and other times it kind of goes into a big sand dune. You have to have kind of faith and swim up over that sand dune and kind of go in that same general direction to find the very stern of the wreck. There again, there's a steering quadrant, big old bronze quadrant. That's the very bitter end of the stern of the wreck. When the sand is not this deep, you can actually see the stern castle there. There's debris. There's stuff you can identify as ship pieces, some portholes, things of that nature in the stern. Same with the other end of the wreck, the bow end. The bow end is usually very covered in sand. Sometimes it's even more further exposed than this. This is a shot here Mark Corbett took, and you can see the hawse pipe on the right-hand side. That's the hawse pipe where the anchor chain and the anchor would have gone up in. But that's pretty good exposure for the bow section. It can be exposed much more, but generally this is sort of average, and it'll also be completely covered up. We check the VETURIA, and we check all of these wrecks every year at the beginning of the first time I'm up on the Diamond Shoals. We make a circuit of these steamers to see who's diveable this season and the condition that they're in. We also look for these other steamers. During this era, these steamers all grounded up on the Diamond Shoal or near the Diamond Shoal, like the Nevada, the first one here, came off the Diamond Shoal. Each of these is a dive site. These ones with the asterisk on them, the Galleron, the Virginia, the Palestro, and the Brewster, and VETURIA comes and goes often. They are there. They show themselves a little bit, or they show themselves a lot, or they show themselves not at all for decades. But the steamers of the Diamond Shoals are a piece of history. They are an era that we need to think about historically, not just for Hatteras, but for the marine world. They represent transition time in the maritime navigation. And now you know a little bit, and I'm talking a little bit because I know an awful lot more about these wrecks, but you know a little bit about a few of the steamers of the Diamond Shoals. If you get a chance, I invite you to come on out and go diving with us, touch this history yourself, and see what's out there. Because every year we're surprised by the steamers of the Diamond Shoals on what we get to see. And there you go. Thank you very much for your attention. And